Chapter 7. Winter. The cold season is always the destruction before the new beginning of spring. I guess the world is at its winter now. Matt heard the call from the lodge lobby as he made his way to the perimeter for his night watch. He turned to see Jimmy closing behind him. "We have to talk," Jimmy said. Matt followed Jimmy to the lodge office. Jimmy, the owner of the lodge, was a mid-sized man, round in the center, with a protruding belly. He was bald to the shine on top, a long beard, and a wrinkled leather face that made him look traveled and tired. "Matt, we have 15 dead. We need to get out of here tonight." "More?" Matt asked, incredulous. "Yes, and I don't think it's going to stop there," Jimmy said. "These people are badly injured, Matt. Burnt, sick, and dying. We need doctors, Matt. Doctors." Matt looked away. He was not sure what to do. He wondered at their problem. "Doctors? Where can we find doctors?" Matt sighed. "Jim, the snow on the ground is not going to make it easy to get in or out of here. The roads are covered. There's almost a foot of snow on the ground. We need to wait for Jacobs to come back. This is a World Police Force operation now. We don't even know what is out there. I know you don't like it, but we'll have to wait. John and I will go into town tomorrow and get some more medical supplies. For now, that's the best we can do." "No, Matt," Jimmy argued, shaking his head. "We have to get these people to a hospital." Matt looked him in the eye now and walked towards him. "Philadelphia is gone. Harrisburg is gone. Where is there a hospital, Jim? You've been out there. It's fucking gone," Matt said. "Those that are sick are too sick to travel. They stay here," Matt responded, pausing between words for emphasis. They stay here, Jim. Jacobs will be back soon," Matt said firmly. "We have to trust that." "It's been months. How do you know he's not dead? We don't know what's out there," Jimmy said. "At this point, how can we know he'll even come back?" "He'll be back. Trust me, Jim," Matt said calmly. "We can't do anything without more men. Look at my arm. I'm barely worth anything as it is." Jimmy stood still, grinding his teeth, flexing his jaw. He was obviously frustrated. "Let's at least get the dead out." Jimmy paused, pushing the issue. "Now." Matt sighed, looked down. "I'll get John." John, Matt, and Jimmy worked through the night as quietly as possible. The bodies were taken from the lodge. They wrapped each body in a plain white sheet. Using a staple gun, they stapled the ends together. It was efficient and necessary, but left a horrendous emptiness deep inside of Matt. Even in his time in the WPF, he had not been this close to so many corpses. He struggled not to feel as though all of it was meaningless. He had to continue to keep everyone calm and safe. Right now, that meant getting the bodies out of the lodge. One by one, they carried the bodies outside and loaded them into Jimmy's old truck. Some of the bodies had begun to smell. The issue of the dead was one no one really wanted to face. And perhaps they should have addressed it earlier. They had not. And so, they were forced to deal with the rotted, turning flesh that was once the sick left of the lodge by Jacobs. There was silence in the group, each fighting their own battle of sadness and nausea. The three men stood at the rear of the truck. "Where do we take them?" John asked. "Away from here," Matt answered. "We'll find a clearing." He paused before he continued. "And burn them." "Burn them? We can't burn them. We'll bury them," cried Jimmy. "The ground is frozen, Jim," Matt said in a cloud of steam. "We can't just leave them to be eaten." The three shared a moment of dreadful truth. It would do no honor to those who had passed to dump them at the side of the road and be a meal for a coyote. And so solemnly, they got into the truck and drove in silence down the snowy highway. "John," Matt said, "get some gas to bring with us." "Are you serious, Matt?" asked Jimmy, interjecting. "We got to do this right." A few miles from the lodge, they found some flat land off of the main road. The snow was thick, and they didn't want to risk getting the truck stuck. After all, there would be a lot less weight in the back of the truck when the deed was done. Once again, and one by one, they hauled out the makeshift body bags. The night sky was filled with clouds. It was now very dark. There were no lights on the highway, and not a sound in the distance. There was only the howl of the wind every now and again. Matt fought the sickness in his guts. He replaced it with the duty of the job that had to be done. "Stack them in a pyramid," Matt said. There was no echo. The night was dead. There was a little wrapped body at the top of the pyramid. Their exploit hit a new level of reality for Matt when the small body was lifted from the truck. They all knew it was a young boy, Angela's friend, Billy. "That was little Billy," Jimmy said, his voice cracking. Matt hadn't got to meet the boy, yet he felt guilty for what had to be done. The unpleasant taste of bile now at the back of his throat. His stomach tensed as he poured gasoline on the sheeted bodies. He lit a match. For a moment, there was a small yellow light from the match, lighting the faces of the three men. Matt threw the match. With a bottom-heavy whooshing, the fire went up in a bright flame. Matt began the pyre. The trio stood and watched as the flame spread and grew. It crackled as it grew, engulfed all that would burn. Matt remembered his father. It's strange how emotions and memories of all kinds can be stirred up at times like this. When he was young, his family had a dog that was hit by a car. It happened right in front of him. The dog's body was crushed. It cried, whimpered with pain. The scene was horrible. A young boy should never witness something like this. The pup appeared to know that his body was broken beyond any measure of repair. And with this innate knowledge, he slowly, very slowly, let go of life. Matt's father had had the dog long before Matt was born. His father was, perhaps, even more attached to the dog than Matt had been. Matt's father carried the weeping animal into the garage. He laid it down, wrapping it in a blanket, and laid it on the gravel floor. After a moment, he closed the door that Matt watched through. There was a quiet pop, ending the dog's misery. His father did it so unemotionally, even though he loved the animal. Once the dog was gone, Matt followed his dad into the backyard, where they buried it. Matt was so angry with his father for being able to kill the dog. It didn't seem to have an effect on him. It just seemed to go against everything he knew of his father. Now, in hindsight, maybe it wasn't anger. It was just that his father was able to just turn off his heart. He could just get what needed to be done. He didn't have any visible remorse. Matt could not understand this. How could his father be a killer? At that age, the necessity of such an act can't be understood. But eventually, he grew to understand. Matt wondered if Angela would have any of that same anger towards him. He wondered if she would have that same feeling of disappointment, if she could see him now. Perhaps she wouldn't understand, much in the same way he didn't when he was young. Matt's father always seemed so strong. He never showed emotion. He wondered if the little girl would see him this way. Growing up, he envied his father's strength. And now, as Matt was tested, he couldn't know if what he was doing was from a place of strength. It was duty. It had to be done. His father would think that he was doing the right thing. Matt wished he could talk with him. Just once more. The fire grew. It was now roaring. The smell was becoming unbearable. The sheets burnt down, revealing the human shapes beneath. The three men stared at the fire. As the flame passed its climax, each man had had enough. They got into the truck and started back to the lodge. When they returned, Matt took up his watch of the perimeter. Jimmy and John went into the lodge without a word. Matt was left alone in the night. He stared out, hoping to see Jacobs return. The night was too quiet. He wished this were all a nightmare, a bad dream. He remembered how simple his life had been. Even in the WPF, he always knew that if he stayed alive, he could go home. But now, there was no home. Now, there was this night, this end. There had to be something he could do. But he didn't know what it was, or when he would do it. Life could not be lived this way. Matt was as restless as a caged lion. He longed for the hope he had the night he went for that drive in his old Silver down Green Isle Circle. The songs he listened to, the hopeful memories that he had. They were just memories now, too far away. Memories of another life, it seemed. A life that passed him by and was now out of his reach. A life that didn't exist anymore. Matt could only hope this feeling passed with the night. The shift ended. He rotated with John the next morning. Matt trudged up the stairs, feeling extra tired. He went into his room and began undressing. "Matt!" A little voice came from the door. "Hey, sweetie, how are you?" "Good," she said. As cheerful as a child could be. "Did you sleep good last night?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "Good," Matt said in a father-like tone. "Matty," Angela asked, "is Santa Claus going to come through here this year?" Matt couldn't believe it. He had forgotten. Christmas was only a week away. "I don't know, sweetie," Matt said, caught off guard. "Were you good this year?" "Yes, I was very good." Angela was so adorable, Matt could hardly stand it. "Then I'm sure he'll come." "Oh, good." "You better write him a letter. Come on now, quick."
Medical supplies. Do you have a first aid kit?
And ran out of the room. Matt smiled at the sight of her excitement. Matt heard a knock at the door.
Turn on the light.
"Come in," he said. "Hi, Matt," Charlotte said. "I'm supposed to mail this letter to Santa." Matt laughed. "I guess that would be you?" Charlotte turned, exited the room. Matt took the letter, set it on the table next to his bed. He stretched and looked around the room. He looked over at the letter, picked it up, and opened it. Angela had extremely nice handwriting for being such a young little girl. It read, "Dear Santa, this year my daddy died in a plane crash. I am very sad. It is okay because Matt takes care of me. For Christmas, I would like a house for me and Matt to live in. I would like it to be bomb-proof so we can live happily ever after, even when people are blowing up bombs. I've been really good, I promise. Love, Angela." Matt's eyes teared at the letter. He smiled. The following day, he rotated his shift with John, as had become the habit. John had to be going through the same types of feelings and thoughts that Matt had. He had split this whole perimeter watch with him from the beginning. Matt had to find out where exactly his head was. "Hey, John, how are you?" Matt asked. "I'm all right, I guess." "Did you sleep well?" "Yeah, sure," he said. "How's everything else?" "Fine." "What do you mean?" John wondered at Matt. What was he getting at? "I just want to make sure everything's all right with you." "Yeah," John said. "Everything's fine." Matt resigned. It was hard to introduce this sudden caring concern into their relationship at this point in time. He walked back into the lodge. John didn't like to talk very much. It was evident that he really hadn't made a good effort to get to know him. Matt at least owed him that for how much he now counted on him, and the fact that Matt might not have made it out of the burning fuselage after the crash. Inside, Jimmy waited for Matt. "Matt," Jimmy said, "the first aid supplies are running low. We need more pain medications. There's a man upstairs." Jimmy shook his head and looked down, his hands on his hips. "He won't let anyone come close to him. He's up there screaming and thrashing. Charlotte's exhausted. She's been dealing with him all night." "Okay," Matt said. "Let's go up there." The two men walked into the room to see a man with boils on his face. He looked grotesque, horrible, in severe pain. Where'd he come from? Matt whispered. He was a homeless man, Jimmy said. We picked him up near the city. How you feeling there? Matt asked. Get out of here, the man screamed. He swiped at the bedside table. All of the items had been swiped off from previous fits. Settle down now, Matt said. We're trying to help you. Look at me. I'm dying. I don't need any help, he barked in a growl. You'll be fine, Matt said. I won't be fine. My face is burned off. My goddamn back is burnt. I want to die. The bedside lamp lay on the floor. He had thrown countless items near him at others who entered the room. Jim, Matt said, come here. They walked out into the hall. I don't know if there's anything we can do for him. He needs a doctor, Matt, Jimmy replied. We don't have a doctor, Matt exclaimed. Just leave him in there. There's nothing we can do. Matt stormed away from Jimmy. He felt hopeless, unsure what to do. There was no way he could sleep now. This was his responsibility, and he had to do something. Matt was beginning to look weak, relying on Jacobs returning. It had become his answer for everything. He was relying on a man who literally hadn't been at the lodge for a whole 24 hours. Matt went to his room and stared out the window. God, tell me what I'm supposed to do, Matt thought. There was no way he could transport the sick man anywhere. Where would he go anyway? Where could they get a doctor? There was just nothing that he could do without Jacobs. He was the key. Until he came back, if he came back, there was nothing Matt could do. Give me some type of sign that it'll be okay. Something. Please, Matt thought in a prayer. The light next to Matt's bed went out. The alarm clock showed no time on its digital display. Matt went to the TV. Pressed the power button. Nothing. He swiped the TV off the wall and onto the ground. The screen shattered. Matt walked to the window. The sun was rising. He had been up all night. Thanks, Matt thought, completing his prayer. He walked into the hall. Charlotte was there. No power? Matt asked. Charlotte shook her head. The inevitable power loss had come. Matt could no longer contain his rage. He raced down the steps and through the lobby to the front door. He opened it. At the same time, he saw a large tour bus pulling into the drive of the lodge. It was Jacobs. Matt sprinted to the snow to the bus. The door opened, and there he was, Jacobs. He stepped out, worried and tired. Blair, get your men. We need to get these people off this bus. Matt called for John, Jimmy, and Davis. Jacobs had a bus full of women and children. Some were injured. Most seemed okay. All were dirty and frayed. Clothes were ragged and torn, brown and soiled. More than 40 were brought into the lodge. They were scared, tired, and hungry. All of them, solemn looks on their face, like they were exposed to an inescapable danger that still hunted them. By the time they were done bringing in all these people, there was no sign of Jacobs. Matt, said Jim, we need more supplies. Matt didn't answer. We've got to go now, Jimmy said. We need supplies. Matt shook his head in agreement, slowly realizing the truth. It was night again when they returned. After an all-day drive through the snow, they cleared out abandoned drug and grocery stores. They loaded in the supplies to Charla. She saw to the women and children, along with her assistant, little Angela. The men let the ladies work. Matt walked out into the cold night. He heard the lodge door open and shut behind him. Blair, follow me, said a familiar voice. Jacobs walked past him. He headed towards the bus. Matt hesitated and then followed. Matt entered the disheveled front area of the bus. Jacobs sat at the driver's seat, Matt in the passenger seat. It's worse than we thought, Jacobs said. What is? DC is destroyed. There's nothing left out there. We hardly found anyone. They're all just gone. Outside of town, only a few. We looked for a doctor, ended up getting word of one. We met up with him and he had hundreds of people in the shelter. Most of those people came from there. Believe it or not, these were the most fit to come with us. We had to triage. Only those who would make the drive came with us. The rest are a few we picked up on the way. The doctor wouldn't leave, Jacob said. His voice was different. We have to go back and get the doctor out of there. Bring the rest of these people here. Matt was speechless. Planes are bombing on the coast, Jacobs continued. We heard talk that troops are starting to flood the shorelines. We don't know for sure if this is true. I don't know who they are. And we don't know who our friends are and who they aren't. It won't be safe here for long. We'll need to get another bus. Get these people and go. Go where? Matt exclaimed. Bring them to safety. Jacobs, Matt started. We don't even have enough resources to take care of who we have to take care of now. Can we really bring more here? Jacob shook his head, as if Matt was speaking some evil. He just wouldn't hear it. We have to save as many as we can. And go where? Matt pleaded. Let me worry about that. Jacobs looked away from Matt. This is crazy, Matt said flatly. Jacobs ignored the comment. I need you to go and collect all the watches here. Any kind of watch, pocket watch, wristwatch, we need to collect them all. Okay, Matt replied. Why would I do that? Listen, Blair, there's no time, Jacob said. Do it, now. Everyone at the lodge who had a watch surrendered it. They were collected in a pillowcase. The deed seemed insane and didn't buy any trust from anyone, yet they all complied. Matt and Jacobs took Jimmy's truck out from the lodge. Tomorrow we leave, Jacob said as they drove. I don't know how long we'll be gone, but we have to get that doctor. They'll all need a doctor if we're going to make it. I can go. You can't go, Blair. Your arm, Jacobs interrupted. You have to look after the lodge. He paused, gathering himself. Did you have any problems while we were gone? No. It was silent. No one. Nothing. Well, that might change. We're far enough off the beaten path, but there's no telling what might find you here. Armed forces could be moving into the area. It's hard to tell how far inland they'll move. I can't see them coming 300 miles inland. We just don't know, Jacob said. Silence. Matt didn't speak. If we don't make it back by the middle of February, take who you can and go. Go where? Matt asked. Jacobs hesitated, let out a sigh. In North Dakota, there were preparations for a central refugee city, Jacob said. It's a safe house, designed in case anything like this were to ever happen. It'll be heavily guarded, so you'll have to be careful, Blair. Tell them you're there to see General Maddock. He'll be in charge. Tell him I sent you. Jacobs paused. Take the safe route around any major population centers. The fallout hasn't reached here yet. We have to avoid it at all costs. We're already at serious risk. We need to stay away from major population areas. That's where they hit us the hardest. That's where the bombs went off. How am I going to get all these people to North Dakota? Matt exclaimed. You're going to have to find a way, Blair. Matt shook his head. No, you better find a way to get back with that doctor. If you felt ill, Jacob said, changing the subject. No, Matt said, I'm fine. Then we just might have some luck yet, Jacob said. The question is, for how long? The highway led them close enough to a valley where the watches could be tossed. Jacob slowed the truck down, got out, and threw the bag off the ledge. He ran back to the truck. He turned the wheel hard. The truck did a 180, and they were heading back the way they came. Okay, that's done, Jacob said. Why are you going back east? Jacobs gave Matt a hard glare. Blair, there are millions of people dead. We're talking about salvaging the American people. This is what the WPF does. Protect the free. Matt held his stare at Jacobs. Suddenly, the truck began to spin out in the snow. Hold on, Jacobs said, gripping the wheel. The truck slid off the highway, sideswiped a wall of rock, not 10 feet from the side of the road. Jacobs gnashed his lip on the steering wheel as he was thrown forward. The truck bounced off the wall and shimmied down the highway as the tires regained traction. Ah, that's not so bad, he said, seeing the blood on his hand. Around the next turn, there was another break in traction. Shit, Jacob said. There was a bump, A bang. They came to a swift stop. The truck was stuck. Jacobs got out, on his hands and knees, hands in the snow. Matt followed. They looked beneath the front of the truck. What is it? Matt asked. The tie rod's broken. Let's start walking. They walked through the thick snow that still coated the highway. Jacobs immediately got back to the subject at hand. If you start seeing planes fly overhead, you better get moving, Jacobs continued. Chances are they aren't 747s. Make sure that you have plenty of food and first aid. I guess I'll take the old school bus that Jimmy brought back from Pittsburgh, Matt said. That should work. Jacobs continued rattling off plans, covering the very basics to the most complex situations. Matt let him ramble until he ran out of things to say. The pair walked on in silence for a while, both focusing on the labor of the walk through the deep snow. I wonder how Angela is, Matt said, and paused. She wrote this letter to Santa. Charlotte gave it to me. She asked for our own house, so that I could take care of her. Well, hopefully she's not too disappointed, Jacobs replied. I gotta do something for her. Well, you've got someone who counts on you. That's something. Yeah, it's a good thing, Matt said. I thought I'd have kids of my own by now in life. I guess now I do. He paused. What keeps you going, Jacobs? Why do you do this? Why do you care? Matt was tired. He needed Jacobs to reveal something about himself. A man does what he can to redeem himself. In his own mind, Jacobs said. Matt looked at him as he stared at his steps. I have to do this, Jacobs said simply. The labor of the walk could be heard in his voice. As twilight faded, they reached the lodge. John held the perimeter since the early morning. I'll have some of my men watch the perimeter. You two have got to get some sleep. We'll wake you tomorrow afternoon. Matt retired from the endless day into the cold of his heatless room. Matt dreamt of Becky, her brother Jamie, and the perfection of their forest. It was saved, preserved now in his dreams. The pink horizons, white water, and the green that hung from the lengths of the cliffs were all pristine. Becky's sweet voice and arched eyebrows, always exuding her innocence and sense of joy and curiosity. They shared a walk through the woods where they held hands and laughed. They drank from the pure water that ran down from the Rockies. The hopeful ideals that the brother and sister shared were somehow entangled in a paradise that actually existed and Matt had actually been to. For now, it only existed in his mind, in his dreams. Nonetheless, in his dream, he did not know any of this, nor did he care. He remembered the feeling of freedom that he felt kissing her in the warmth of summer, the dreamy ideals of hope for a better world. The moment extended from his dream. The hotness of the balmy summer heat reached into his mending body in the cold of the brisk Pennsylvania night. Remember what I told you last night? Jacobs asked. Matt nodded. These people need a leader. You need to be that leader. You're the only one that spoke up. You signed up for this, Jacobs reiterated. Matt nodded again. Here's the map to Dakota. Only take the route that I have highlighted here. If you take anything else, you're putting everyone at risk of exposure. Got it, Matt said, the map neatly folded in his hand. Good luck, Blair. Jacobs extended his hand. Good luck to you, Matt said. You'll need it. Matt watched as Jacobs walked towards the bus. The bus started with a roar. Matt watched as it pulled out of the lodge. From behind, he heard little Angela's voice calling. Matt, she cried. Today is Christmas Eve. Is it? Matt said, surprise in his voice. Santa comes tonight. Matt smiled, yet he was saddened inside. The way the world was left little room for hopes and fantasies in a little girl's life. Matt and his little angel walked into the lodge. As they walked into the room, they saw a tiny pine tree with a star on top, a present neatly wrapped beneath. It read, For Angela, from Santa. Matt knelt, picked it up. Charla, he thought, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Later, Matt finished his night watch. It was early morning now. He entered the lodge to find Angela waiting for him at the door to the lobby. Matt, Santa came. Look, I waited for you to open it, she excitedly explained. Angela began tearing at the wrapping. Beneath, she found a photo of her and Matt walking together. It was placed in a house-like frame. On the frame, it read, "Home is where the heart is." "Look, Matt, we have a little house." She was enthralled with the gift, as though her wish had come true. Matt hugged her. "Someday," he said, "we'll get a real house, and we'll live in it together, okay?" "Okay," she said. Charlotte stood watching the scene, smiling. Matt mouthed to her, "Thank you." Matt remembered his own sister opening presents. They had Christmas morning with their parents and always had to take turns. At the time, it annoyed Matt. Amy took so long to open everything, and she showed it off like her parents didn't know what she was getting. As if Santa actually brought the gifts. But now he was glad that he had these memories. He missed his sister. She was so smart and had so much life yet to live. If what Jacobs told him were true, then she was gone with the rest of DC and Overly. Still, Matt had her in memory. He was glad that he took time with her on the eve of his leaving for vacation. He would always remember her smiling. The perimeter watch had become a bore. It was hard for Matt and the men to keep from getting complacent, to keep from losing the intensity. Nothing ever seemed to happen. At night, there was hardly a sound. Only the distant animal calls. Coyotes, wolves. There was never a human sound. No cars, no planes. John reported that the day watch was the same. Not much happening. Still, Matt insisted that perimeter watches take place. "The time we don't keep up the watch is the time where something will happen," Matt explained. And so, they kept up the watches. Another issue arose. Many of the people that Jacobs had brought were hardly injured. They were getting restive. Food supplies were given in small rations. In the inactivity, the mundane made them uneasy, restless. They lost the fear that had been instilled in them before the new year. Matt was forced to confront many trying to leave. Early one morning, he saw 2 women and 2 children walking away from the lodge. "Where are you headed?" Matt asked. "We're going back to DC, said the woman. No, you can't go back there. There's nothing for you there. There is nothing there. You have to stay here. It won't be much longer until we leave." "Leave?" she asked. "And where are we going to go? If there's nothing out there?" Matt paused. "West. But for now, we're safer here. The winter is too cold for you and the children. There's no safety in the East. You've got to trust me." "Trust you? Who the hell are you?" the woman said. They really didn't know what was going on. There was no television, no internet, no cell phone. No one knew how dire the circumstances are. No one knew what Matt had come to know through Jacobs. Some false sense of normalcy had set in. The recent trauma seemed to subside. Now, it seemed things were back to normal. But if what Jacobs had said was true, it was far from normal. More importantly, far from safe. They didn't even know who Matt was. He was out there conducting watches, trying to keep everyone safe. But the sense of safeness passed away. Now, many felt boxed in, caged. They didn't even know of the perimeter watch. They didn't know what Jacobs was doing or what the plan was. What little Jacobs had shared with Matt, he shared with John, Jimmy, and Charla. But it never occurred to Matt that he should fill the rest of the group in on just what was happening. They had to be told, Matt thought. They had to know. Matt stood before the dining hall, where he gathered everyone staying at the lodge. It was a rather large room. It served as a rustic cafe where patrons could dine. There was a large moose head that hung over the fireplace in the front of the room. He stood in front of the fireplace, John by his side. The people looked at him, talked amongst themselves. They speculated on just what was going on, making their best guesses on why they had been corralled. Matt patiently waited at the front of the room as the final refugees filed in. Jacobs had told him, people need to be led. This was his duty. It wasn't some half-cocked power grab or ego-motivated act. He stepped up to lead these people. If he didn't do this, no one would. Off in his periphery, Jimmy and Sharla wondered at him. So did John. They wondered what exactly this was all about. Now was his time. Matt thought about how up to this point in his life, he preferred to be alone. He didn't like to be a follower or a leader. People just seemed to complicate things. But now, it was either step up or let chaos take over at the lodge. As spring approached, it was quite possible he'd never see Jacobs again and be charged with taking these people to safety, somewhere in the North Dakota plains. Matt was nervous. He became self-conscious. He was dressed in an old green button-up shirt and black jeans. He wondered if he even looked like a leader. Nonetheless, he put aside the negative thoughts. He could only focus on what had to be done. The crowded room had everyone chatting. Some were obviously upset, spouting aloud why they didn't want to be there. Others were curious to what was going on. They quietly looked around the room. The people stopped coming in, and it appeared everyone was there. The noise of the crowd filled the hall.
"Excuse me,"
Matt said aloud. There was no break in the chatter. Matt looked to John. He stared back with a sympathetic look. Matt clenched his teeth.
"Many of you are probably wondering what you're doing here,"
Matt said, now in a loud voice. Attention turned. Without pause, Matt continued.
"I can only tell you what I know. Our country has come under attack. It is thought the same in other countries as well."
Silence filled the room. All attention was now on Matt.
"Who are you?"
one man yelled out. Other shouts began.
"I am Matthew Blair. I am in charge here at the lodge. This is now a WPF situation."
He looked at John, Sharla, and Jimmy. They looked back to him, incredulous looks on their faces.
"It's important we work together if we want to survive. I do not know what the dangers are out there. I do know you must stay until it is right for us to leave. For now, we're safe. The same promise cannot be made to you away from the lodge."
The room was silent. Matt went on.
"As many of you know, we have a perimeter watch going on night and day. Some of you have tried to leave. Listen, I can't force you to stay. So if you want to leave, leave. But I urge you not to do so. Until I hear back from my counterpart, the man who brought many of you here, we will stay at the lodge under my supervision."
Matt's words echoed throughout the hall.
"He will return with a doctor, which many of you need. And he should be returning very soon. Once he does, we do have a plan. We will relocate to a safe zone."
Voices in the audience shot off. How will we get there? When will the doctors be here? Why should we listen to you? How long will we have to be here? You can't force us to stay.
I hear your questions,
Matt said, holding up his hand to his audience.
"Jacobs gave his word he'd be back in February. We will make arrangements then."
Matt paused. The voices apprehensively spoke to one another.
"If there are any concerns, please speak to me in person. Many of our homes have been destroyed. These days are dark for sure. But now is not the time for mourning these losses. In our stillness, we will lose our chance to regain our lives. We must work together."
Matt exited the room, preparing to take his night watch. Jimmy followed. "Didn't know you were such a public speaker," he laughed. "What do you mean you're in charge here anyway?" Matt stopped. "I mean, I am now in charge. It's very easy, Jim. Now take Sharla. Get some sleep. It's late." There was a defiance and determination revealed in Matt's voice. Jimmy was surprised at Matt's unfriendly and instrumental tone towards him, but he listened and did as he asked, led Charla to their room. Matt walked outside. He stood outside the front of the lodge. Davis, Matt said, giving orders. I'll take the reader tonight. You stay up front. Davis nodded as Matt headed to the back. The men of the watch were suddenly wary of Matt. They hadn't seen him like this before. He gave orders in a different tone. He was more purposeful and confident. Those at the dining hall spoke of Matt's speech. They discussed how he told them he was in charge. The men reluctantly agreed that there was not another better suited for the role. In the days that followed, Matt received numerous visitors. Some asked to leave. Matt pled with them, warned them not to go. In the end, he left the choice to them. None decided to leave after talking with him. He reassured them that there was nothing out there better than their current circumstance. Soon, they would be leaving for an even safer place. He reasoned with them. And still, others came for comfort. Fear still haunted others at the lodge. It was painful for Matt to see. One woman came to him with her oldest son. Her name was Lisa. How she had come to be with them at the lodge. She was driving to visit her family in Florida. On the trip, the bombs went off. It didn't seem like luck at the time, but she and her son were in a tunnel. Lisa wouldn't have survived, but the cars in front of her took on most of the blast. Her car was covered by the other cars, protecting her from the power of the blast. The other cars were literally raised by the power of the blast, tossed on top of hers. Her husband and her youngest son were in New York City. There was no chance that she would see them again. But my son and I walked out of the tunnel, she said. We found a building to sleep in. There were others in the building, but no one else, no one around. I didn't know what to do. I prayed, and my prayers were answered when that man came, Jacobs. He said he only found a few others in Philadelphia. God must be watching over us. Matt listened intently, with empathy. If there's anything I can do, she went on, please let me know. There's a reason God brought me here. I want to do my part for him letting us survive, she said. Matt admired her faith. Try to relax, stay calm, keep your mind busy. We'll be okay. Matt looked to her son. And what is your name? Tristan, sir. Good to meet you, Tristan. Take care of your mom for me, okay? Matt said. That's your job. The little boy nodded, solemnly accepted his duty. Thank you for seeing us, Mr. Blair, she said. Please let us know what a woman and child could do to help. I will, Matt said. They exited the room. Jimmy peeked his head in Matt's door. That belligerent old man died, Matt. We have to get him out of here. Matt nodded his head, looked down with grief. He left, closing the door behind him. Was there something more I could have done for him? Matt walked out of the room, caught up with Jimmy. Take me to him, Matt said. Jimmy's eyes fell from Matt's, and he led the way. They entered the room where the man's decaying body lay. There was a muted silence in the air. Matt heard Jimmy's swallow of grief. No more will die here, Jim. I promise you that. Jim gave a grave look to Matt. He wondered at his defiant hope. Matt bowed his head at the dead man's corpse and then left the room. Matt saw Angela standing at the foot of Charla. They stood together in the kitchen, Angela helping her do the dishes. Angela was going on about what she could remember of her father. She heard the door as he entered. Angela turned. Maddie! She ran to him. He knelt and hugged her. I just came to see if you're doing okay today. I'm doing good, she said. Good. Charlotte turned to watch the young man and the little girl talk. She was always fond of the fact that Matt was taking care of her. When we get to the city, will we be able to get our house then, Maddie? I think so. Yes, Matt smiled. Goody, she screamed. Is she being a good helper today, Charlotte? The older woman nodded in approval. I dried all the dishes. Over 100, Matt. The excitement and energy that always came from Angela was always impressive. It was very refreshing, reinvigorating to witness the hopeful energy of a child. Charlotte, have you seen John around? Matt asked. I need to see him. He's not in his room. He was here eating about a half hour ago, she said. Okay, Matt said. Well, I'll see you ladies later. Bye, Maddie, Angela said. Matt looked everywhere, but there was no sign of John. He walked around the rear of the lodge. A few others were loitering around the back. Have any of you seen John? Matt looked out into the woods, almost in a daydream. He turned and faced the rear of the lodge. There, high above where anyone would naturally see, John sat on the roof. John, Matt yelled, what are you doing? John just sat, shrugged his shoulders. Matt climbed an old antenna. It served as a ladder that reached the roof, and he walked over to John. I just come up here and sit sometimes. It's nice up here, Matt said. There was no reply from John. Hey, we need to talk about how we're going to get these people out of here. I mean, if Jacobs doesn't come back. John looked over to Matt. Jimmy's bus? It's not big enough, Matt said. We're going to have to find something else. A second vehicle. We'll have to head into town this week at some point. Get something else. That may be hard to do. There isn't much out there, he said. Maybe we should go to Philly, Matt said. We're going to have to take the bus, though, and that won't be fun. The truck's broken. John said nothing, just like usual. We'll go tomorrow morning, Matt said. Find someone to replace your shift tomorrow. Matt, John said. Matt turned, leaving. I got to tell you something. John hesitated. I don't know if you want to trust me on these trips with you. What? Matt said, confused by what John was saying. Why not? I can't remember anything. I can't remember anything at all before the crash. I mean, I remember the crash, but nothing before. And why shouldn't I trust you? Sometimes I get these headaches. And when I'm out here, I just can't, I just get so angry. John was upset. He stuttered. Are you saying you don't want to help? No, I'm saying that I don't know. John, look, your memory will come back. I don't know if I wanted to. John seemed to know there was something dark that hid from him in his subconscious. What do you mean? Matt asked. I don't know what I mean. John, don't blow things out of proportion. You're the only one I can rely on. If you can't help, just tell me. I understand. I don't want to play this game. I think you're just scared, and everyone here is scared. John didn't reply. John? Matt said. I'll be fine, John finally said. Get your watch covered tomorrow, Matt said, walking away. I need you tomorrow. Jimmy and Matt rolled the old man on the sheet. They fastened the ends with a staple or two and carried him into the woods. They set a single pyre to the body, just as they had done with the others. This could get old. We have to do it much more, Jimmy said. I promise you, Jimmy. No more will die, Matt said. How many more are sick? Yeah, many are sick, Jimmy answered. Charlotte thinks it's the radiation. Hopefully, Jacob shows up with that doctor, Matt said, thinking aloud. What if he doesn't show? Jimmy asked, his face silhouetted in the pyre light. If he isn't here by the middle of February, we'll have to leave. Jacobs thinks war will reach here soon after. War? Matt looked at Jimmy, a face of hard honesty. Do you think I was joking when I said it was going to get dangerous out there? What about the WPF? Jimmy answered. Shouldn't they be doing something here at home about this? We are, Matt said starkly. Come on, let's get back. I have to take my watch soon. Matt approached John. How's your head? It's fine, John said. He didn't appear to appreciate the comment. Well, go sleep. John walked away. He was very short with Matt. Did you get your watch covered tomorrow? Matt asked as John walked away. Davis, John said over his shoulder.
We leave tomorrow morning. Early. John did not stutter in his walk. He kept straight, no variance in his cadence, into the lodge. Matt turned to see Davis to the far side of the front of the perimeter. Davis, Matt called. Yes, sir, he called back. Davis ran, approaching Matt. Are you up for a double shift? Yes, sir, Davis said. Matt noticed he was calling him sir. He embraced the authority. I already thought about it. I can pull 24 hours. Okay, Matt said. We need you to be alert. Each day, it's more plausible that some danger can reach our perimeter. Yes, sir. Get back out there, Davis, Matt ordered. I'll stay on this side. Davis ran back to his station on the perimeter. The night went slowly, as was the norm. At first light, John met Matt. The rest of the men rotated with their counterparts in the rotation. Matt again called for Davis. Yes, sir, Davis reported. John made it obvious. He was surprised at Davis calling Matt sir. Now I have a concern, Matt said. I think we'll be back before nightfall, but I'm not sure. If we aren't back, you have to take command of the rotation. Matt thought out loud. Now if we don't return, I'm leaving Jimmy in charge. I've talked to him already about this. He knows what I've just told you. Stay alert. I told you last night the danger grows every day. We knew to expect it here at some point. Matt gave one last look around the lodge. John felt that Matt looked as if he would never see it again. He felt an unease present in Matt. Matt had not left the lodge in almost 5 months. Perhaps it was just his nerves. Let's go, Matt shouted to John. He started walking to the old school bus. They boarded the bus. Matt started it up. I talked to Jimmy, Matt said. There's an old bus garage outside of Hazleton. We got quite a drive ahead of us. John said nothing. He sat down, letting Matt do the driving. I'm going to let this thing warm up for a few minutes. You want some coffee? John just glared at Matt. Matt waited for him to answer. No? Matt asked. No answer. Matt exited the bus, leaving it running. With his coffee in hand, the drive began in silence. Matt wondered what was wrong with John. He guessed it had something to do with the conversation they had had the day prior. He decided to focus on the task at hand. He'd leave the discussion of John's attitude for another time. The highway was thick with snow. It took all of Matt's concentration to keep the bus on the road. The bus was long and needed precise maneuvering to drive. He went over the directions mentally once again. Hours passed. Matt felt tired, gripped his coffee with his healing right arm. He sipped it like it was the very nectar of life. John, still awake, didn't utter a word thus far. Matt pulled off the exit. The bus garage is somewhere on this road. Keep your eyes open, he said to John. There were no lights coming from Hazleton. There were no lights at all. It was like a ghost town, a smoky ruin. They hadn't passed a car on the road. Matt felt like he was in some sort of awful dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was very real. And this, he was forced to remind himself of. Here it is, Matt said, pulling in. Okay, let's go. The two hopped the fence, the barrier between the other buses and them. We'll take the one that has the most fuel, Matt said. They went from school bus to school bus, checking each one. They called out the level of fuel that each bus had. Finally, they found a bus with almost a full tank. Matt walked over to the bus. John stood in the doorway. I can't believe how quiet it is out here, Matt said. There is no one. I came through here before it all. There were so many people. It was so alive. John looked around. I don't know if I've ever been here. John, Matt said, I don't know what I'd do without you here. Thanks for all you've done. There was a noise in the distance. It was a huge noise, a sonic boom. Something sounding like an explosion. Matt looked to the sky. A fighter jet. Matt couldn't conceive of any logical reason there would be a fighter jet in a rural area of Pennsylvania. That's no 747, Matt said. Come on, let's get back. Now, Matt ordered. Get that bus back to the lodge in one piece. Be careful. I need you to be careful. Through the snow. There was no traffic,
There was nothing. The drive seemed long, longer now on the way back. At first, John drove slowly. His speed tested Matt's patience, but eventually, he kept up with Matt's pace. The night came over them, black and white, only snow and dark skies. Matt saw that the planes had circled round. Matt wondered if they saw the buses, but soon they were out of sight. Maybe they were WPF, Matt thought. Maybe they were looking for survivors. Or maybe their unknown enemy was out to hunt and kill them. Matt hurried. He sped through his comfort zone and beyond it. He sped around corners. He was fearful each time. At this point, he felt he had learned the limits of the bus well. It seemed John was a little more cautious, lagging behind. By some blessing, they reached the lodge. It seemed quiet. The men on the perimeter watch ran to the buses. But as Jacobs had instructed, if the planes came, leave. Matt got out of his bus. He held up a finger to silence them, looked up to the sky. There was nothing. Matt let out a breath. And then, as if on cue, boom was heard in the distance. Matt ducked down in reaction to the noise. A plume of fire rose from the distance. This was it. He had to get everyone out. Now. Another boom. This time, closer. We have to get everyone up. Now, Matt said. Did you see the jets? Get everyone up. Matt turned to John. Keep your bus running. I need you to drive them, my friend. Follow me. They both ran into the lodge. Matt ran to wake Charla and Jimmy. He went to his room to wake Angela. Come on, honey. It's time to go, he said, as she lay in the bed, waiting for her guardian. He watched as she filled her pockets with relics of the room they shared. Suddenly, the lodge shook. Hurry, Angela, Matt yelled. Matt grabbed her, picked her up, and ran to the bus. Running behind a group of frantic people, rushing out of the lodge. They boarded. He sat her in the seat right next to him. As Matt sat in the driver's seat, he directed everyone who entered to move all the way to the back. After the bus was full, he turned to Angela. I'm going to see if there's anyone who's still inside. She just looked at him, scared and in shock, as he ran out of the bus. He ran upstairs as sounds of war exploded, now too close to the lodge. He opened each door on every floor of the lodge, looking for life. The second floor, none, no one. The third, empty. The third door from the last opened. Inside, he saw a sick woman on the floor. She had tried to get up, but her exhaustion kept her grounded. Her daughter sat by her side, encouraging her. Matt lifted her to her feet. He called for the young girl to follow. They searched the other empty rooms. There were no others. They hurried back to the bus. He held the lady in both arms. His arm was finally beginning to heal, though the pain of her weight ached in his bones. They reached the bus. Matt found a seat for the sick woman. Her daughter tended to her. Running up to the driver's seat, explosions illustrated the horizon. John appeared in the doorway of the bus. John, we head west, Matt screamed. His arm ached. John left the bus door, running back to his bus. Matt put the bus in drive and took off out of the lodge. He turned one last time to look at their fallen haven. Just then, another bus shot into the drive they had just abandoned. It was Jacobs. Matt stopped the bus. He threw it in park, ran down the steps. He ran to Jacobs' bus. The door opened. Jacobs met him at the bottom of the steps. Head west, Matt screamed as Jacobs appeared the doorway. Jacobs nodded in understanding. As a sonic boom was heard above, Matt re-entered his bus and sped off. The trio of buses headed into the dark of the cold night. This has been a presentation of The Landscape of a Heart, an audio novel. Stay tuned next week for Chapter 8, Hunted. Subscribe to this feed. Thank you.